****. Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, we step aboard a train unlike any other, the Frostbell Excursion. A winter journey wrapped in elegance, candlelit carriages, and silent snowfall drifting past the windows. But beneath this charming exterior lies a chilling secret. A killer rides among the passengers. Clues hide between luggage racks, whispered conversations, and footprints in fresh snow. And as the train winds deeper into the frozen countryside, Miss Marple must rely on sharp observation, gentle intuition, and a lifetime of quiet wisdom to unmask the truth before the next stop becomes someone's last. So find a comfortable seat. Settle in as the snow begins to fall and let your imagination travel with us. The mystery is about to begin. And on this journey, every glance, every clue, and every silence matters. Chapter 1. The Frostbell Excursion. Snow fell in slow, drifting spirals over the Frostbell station, soft as powdered sugar and twice as bright under the pale winter sun. The old station clock ticked steadily above the wooden archway, its frosted hands moving with deliberate calm, refusing to acknowledge the bustle beneath it. Holiday banners fluttered in the cold breeze, and the iron rails shimmered like silver threads stretching into the white horizon. It was a picture postcard scene, a scene entirely too peaceful for what was about to unfold. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped warmly in a thick wool coat and carrying a small travel satchel, stepped onto the platform with the quiet assurance of someone who had seen enough winters and enough crimes to never be fooled by a pretty setting. The Frostbell Excursion Train was something she had heard of for years, a scenic tour through the winter countryside, filled with carols, fine dining, and panoramic views of frozen lakes, a gift from an old friend. She had accepted it mostly to enjoy a rare moment of leisure. Only fools believed trouble would politely stay away simply because one wished to relax, but one could always hope. Steam billowed from the engine in great, white clouds, rolling along the platform like restless ghosts. Through the mist, passengers boarded with cheerful anticipation, families bundled in scarves, couples holding hands, elderly men adjusting their hats, children bouncing with excitement. The festive mood was contagious, but Miss Marple could not help noticing the subtle undercurrents, the hurried whispers, the curious glances exchanged between strangers, the tension in the shoulders of certain individuals who lingered too long before boarding. People always betrayed themselves in the small details. A young porter rushed past her, nearly brushing her shoulder. "Oh, sorry, madam," he said, cheeks flushed from cold and exertion. "No harm done," Miss Marple answered kindly, though her eyes followed him with mild curiosity. His nervousness felt sharper than mere winter jitters. Behind her, two women whispered urgently, "I told you, Agatha. I saw him talking to her last night." Nonsense. He wouldn't dare. He would if she threatened to expose. Their voices dipped as Miss Marple turned. But the seed was planted. Secrets were already boarding the train. The warning signs begin. The Frostbell Excursion Train itself was a grand relic of an older age, polished brass. Dark oak interiors, velvet seats, crystal lamps. Miss Marple stepped inside her assigned carriage, letting the warmth envelop her. A steward with impeccable posture guided passengers to their compartments. "Welcome aboard, madam." Carriage B, seat 14, just near the observation window." "Thank you," Miss Marple said, settling into her seat. The snow outside blurred into soft white streaks as the train slowly rumbled to life. Moments later, the door slid open and a tall, elegantly dressed man entered, his expression carved in stone. He scanned the passengers like a general inspecting troops. That kind of posture came from authority or guilt, often both. Behind him followed a young woman, timid and pale, clutching a notebook to her chest. Her eyes darted around nervously across the aisle. An elderly colonel polished his monocle, while a sharp-featured woman in fox fur glared out the window with an intensity bordering on fury. Miss Marple's gaze drifted over each face, quietly cataloging them like pieces on a chessboard. Every passenger had a story. One of them had a deadly one. The train chugged through snowy fields, its rhythmic clatter creating a soothing lull. Passengers sipped warm tea, played cards, or simply gazed at the winter landscape. Laughter echoed faintly down the corridor. But beneath the warmth and music lay an undercurrent that only Miss Marple seemed to detect: a tension too subtle for most eyes. It sharpened when the conductor made his way down the aisle, checking tickets with brisk professionalism. When he reached the elegant man, the man's smile was tight, forced. "Everything in order, sir?" the conductor asked politely. "Of course," the man replied. But Miss Marple noticed the faint tremor in his hand as he returned his wallet to his coat. A guilty conscience rarely stayed still. At noon, a low cheer rose as the dining carriage announced luncheon. Passengers began to file out, eager for steaming soup and winter roast. Miss Marple took her time. Rushing never revealed anything useful. Lingering often did. As she stood, she spotted something odd just beneath her seat, a small scrap of torn paper. She bent to pick it up. It was part of a letter, written in a hurried, uneven hand. "He knows what you did, if the truth comes out." The rest was ripped away. Miss Marple frowned slightly. Secrets had very quick legs, but guilt often left crumbs. A sudden stop. She was about to tuck the note into her handbag when the train jolted violently. Gasps filled the carriage. The lights flickered. Then the train screeched to a halt. Passengers stood in alarm, some clutching seats for balance. "What on earth?" a woman cried. The conductor rushed past, his face paling. "Stay in your seats. Remain calm." Miss Marple exchanged a knowing look with him. That was not the voice of a man responding to a mechanical issue. That was the voice of a man who had just discovered something unforgivable. Moments later, a shout echoed from the front of the train. Then another. Then a piercing scream. Miss Marple tightened her grip on her satchel and rose with purpose. Murder had occurred aboard the Frostbell Excursion Train, and no one was getting off until she solved it. Chapter 2. The whispers in carriage C. The Frostbell Excursion Train had settled into its steady winter rhythm. The soft clatter of wheels on frozen tracks, the muted hum of passengers speaking over steaming cups of tea, and the occasional low whistle drifting across the frosted countryside. Dawn had fully broken now, casting pale, pearlescent light through the carriage windows. Snow-coated fields stretched endlessly beyond the glass, blurring into white smudges. As the train sped forward, Miss Marple sat precisely where she liked to sit, near the window, but not too close to the aisle, her gloved hands resting atop her small leather handbag. Her knitting was tucked away for now, for she had already begun to sense the light shift in atmosphere that precedes any disturbance of peace. There was anxiety in this carriage. She could feel it even before the young porter returned. Carriage C, unlike the others, had fallen almost unnaturally quiet. People attempted conversations, but their voices hovered, unfinished, drifting off as if swallowed by the cold. Eyes darted now and then toward the corridor where the porter had disappeared, carrying with him the weight of a discovery that none of them yet understood. But all of them felt Miss Marple watched them carefully, her eyes moving gently, politely, as though she were idly admiring scenery. But her mind was sharp, active. She had learned in her long and observant life that when something unusual occurs, human beings, far more than landscapes, tell the story. The passengers nearest her were a steady intention. To her left sat Mrs. Whitcomb, a stout woman in a thick wool coat decorated with 3 overly ambitious brooches. She fidgeted with the clasp of her handbag, her fingers trembling slightly. The woman had done this 5 times in the last 10 minutes, and Miss Marple had counted everyone. Nervousness rarely repeats itself so rhythmically unless something deeper fuels it. Across from her sat Mr. Layton, a tall, refined gentleman with silver hair swept back elegantly. His posture was impeccable, his movements deliberate, but his jaw tightened whenever footsteps sounded in the corridor. A man accustomed to control, Miss Marple noted, and a man who feared losing it. Then there was the young couple diagonally across the aisle, Mr. and Mrs. Rayner, newly married, judging by their unbroken sheen of enthusiasm. The wife clung to her husband's arm, whispering anxiously in his ear. The husband, in turn, kept glancing toward the corridor with the weary protectiveness of someone trying to shield another from worry he himself felt deeply. But the most interesting person, Miss Marple thought, sat near the end of the carriage, a man in a dark green overcoat, collar turned up, hat pulled low, hands tucked into his pockets. He had not spoken since boarding. Not once, not even a polite greeting. People like that were often shy, of course, but shy men did not repeatedly observe others from the corners of their eyes. They did not sit with their muscles wound tight as coiled springs, nor did they adjust their seating positions every time someone walked past them. Miss Marple watched him look up sharply as the porter finally reappeared, face pale and lips pressed tightly together. The young man's hands shook slightly as he removed his cap. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice hushed, "the conductor has asked that everyone remain seated. Constable Reeves will be joining us shortly at the next stop." A ripple swept through the carriage. The air shifted, tightening further. Mrs. Whitcomb gasped softly. Mr. Layton's jaw clenched. The young couple exchanged worried looks. The quiet man in the green overcoat leaned back, intentionally or perhaps instinctively fading into the shadows of his seat. Miss Marple, however, felt no shock, only confirmation. A crime had occurred aboard the Frostbell Excursion Train. "And what?" Mrs. Whitcomb asked in a trembling voice. "Has happened? Is something wrong with the engine?" The snow, perhaps? The porter swallowed hard. No, madam. The train is functioning perfectly. Then why the constable? Mr. Layton demanded, although his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. The porter hesitated. There has been an incident. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly and spoke gently, her voice a warm balm in the tense carriage. My dear boy, she said kindly, has someone been hurt? His eyes flicked to her, grateful, fearful, unsure. Yes, ma'am, he whispered. A passenger in carriage A. Mrs. Whitcomb gasped again. The young bride pressed a hand to her mouth. Even the quiet man in the green overcoat stiffened visibly. What kind of injury? Mr. Layton pressed. The porter opened his mouth, closed it, then answered with a trembling sigh. A gentleman has been found dead. Dead. The word moved through the carriage like a sudden cold draft. Miss Marple felt the tension sharpen. Not fear alone, but guilt, suspicion, calculation, emotions people tried to hide, but rarely could in moments such as this. How dreadful, whispered Mrs. Whitcomb. Dead how? Mr. Layton demanded sharply. The porter shook his head. I'm not at liberty to say. The conductor has requested everyone remain calm and seated until we reach Frostbell Halt, where Constable Reeves will conduct an investigation. Miss Marple's eyes softened. Poor boy, he had clearly never dealt with death in such close proximity. As the porter hurried back down the corridor to deliver the same announcement to the next carriage, Miss Marple folded her hands together thoughtfully. A murder on a moving train, a confined set of passengers, a body discovered in a different carriage from where the panic now bloomed, and already subtle threads began to weave together. The quiet man with the green overcoat, the anxious Mrs. Whitcomb, the rigid Mr. Layton, the overly fearful young couple. The porter who knew more than he wished he did. Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the frosted window as snow-laden trees flashed past. Branches bowed and heavy. People behaved so interestingly, she murmured softly to herself. When they believe they may soon be questioned. The Frostbell Excursion Train sped on, carrying with it a truth wrapped in layers of fear and frost, and Miss Marple, with her quiet wisdom and gentle eyes, prepared herself, for every murder has its pattern, and she had already begun to see the first lines forming. Chapter 3. The Stranger in Compartment B12. The Frostbell Excursion Train had fully settled into its comfortable rhythm, the soft clatter of wheels over steel. The occasional whistle carried off into the snowy distance, and the warm thrum of the carriage heaters fighting the chill outside. For many passengers, it was a soothing lullaby. For Miss Marple, it was the perfect backdrop to observe the smallest of human details. She stood now in the narrow corridor of carriage B, leaning very slightly on her walking cane as she watched the young porter hurry past. His name, she recalled, was Stephen, polite, diligent, and far more observant than he pretended to be. Snowflakes clung to his uniform from his brief stop at the forward caboose, and his breath still held the brisk bite of the outside wind. "Excuse me." "Stephen," Miss Marple called gently. He paused immediately, adjusting his cap. "Yes, ma'am?" "Sorry, a bit of a rush." "Conductor's orders." "Quite understandable," she replied pleasantly. Though I wondered, do you happen to know who occupies compartment B12? His face shifted, just slightly, but enough. A hesitation. A guarded flicker in the eyes. Oh, well. Different people, ma'am. Changes every trip. Indeed. And today? She asked, her expression soft, harmless. Grandmotherly. Stephen's jaw tightened as though he knew better than to underestimate an elderly woman, who noticed far too much. I'm not sure I should say. Miss Marple smiled. Of course you shouldn't, but I am not asking anything private, dear. I am simply concerned. There has been an unpleasant discovery, and the gentleman in B12 may have seen something. Stephen's eyes widened. Oh, you mean the body, they said. He cut himself off, glancing nervously in both directions. Wasn't supposed to mention that, he whispered. Quite right, she said softly. And I will mention nothing that could get you into trouble. But if someone in B12 might have seen or heard something important, it could save the conductor a great deal of difficulty later. The boy swallowed. Then he leaned in slightly. There is a man in B12, he whispered. But he's strange. Miss Marple gently tilted her head. Strange in what way? He boarded last, Stephen said. Nearly missed the departure. Didn't have luggage except a single leather case. And he didn't speak to anyone. Eyes fixed straight ahead. I tried to make conversation, just to welcome him, but he looked through me like I wasn't even there. Miss Marple absorbed every detail. And where is he now? Stephen nodded toward the closed compartment door halfway down the corridor. Inside, he said. Hasn't come out since we left Frostbell Station, except once to look out the window. And even then, he seemed to be searching for something. Or someone. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened only slightly. Thank you, she said warmly. You've helped more than you know. Stephen hurried off toward the dining car, leaving Miss Marple alone with the quiet hum of the train. She approached the door to compartment B12, stopping just short of knocking. A faint sound, almost imperceptible, stirred from within. Paper rustling. A soft thud. Footsteps pacing slowly, and then silence. Miss Marple lifted her knuckles to the door and tapped gently. A pause, then a voice, low, controlled, and distinctly unfriendly. Yes? Pardon the interruption, Miss Marple said in her kindest tone. May I trouble you for a moment? I'm merely a fellow passenger trying to clarify a small matter. Not interested. The voice sliced through the door like cold steel. Miss Marple did not move. If the matter concerns a death on the train, she said gently, one really ought to be interested. She could practically hear the man go still. Another long pause, then, reluctantly, come in. Miss Marple opened the compartment door and stepped inside. What she saw was immediately curious. The man in B12 was in his mid-30s, sharply dressed in dark wool, with a jawline too tightly held and eyes that never seemed to blink. But what caught her attention was not his expression, it was his posture. He stood near the small fold-out table, one hand resting on a leather case that seemed too heavy for its size, the other hand resting near the inner pocket of his coat. On instinct, Miss Marple catalogued every detail of his stance. People reveal themselves in how they stand, she often said. Who told you to come here? He asked. My dear sir, Miss Marple said pleasantly. If I waited to be invited everywhere I needed to go, I should miss out on the most important information. He didn't smile. You mentioned a death, he said. Is that why the porter ran down the corridor earlier? Miss Marple nodded. A man found frozen between the carriages. Unfortunate, certainly. Suspicious, undoubtedly. The stranger's jaw clenched. I didn't see anything, he said quickly. Quite possible, Miss Marple agreed. But often we notice more than we realize. A strange sound, a shadow where it should not be, a movement too hurried to be innocent. I said I saw nothing. Yes, Miss Marple said softly. And it is often the case that the people who saw nothing saw the most. His eyes narrowed. She continued before he could speak. For instance, when I knocked on the door just now, you were standing, not sitting. Your case was already open. You had paper laid out, and you moved to hide it as I entered. I don't know what you're implying. Oh, I think you do, Miss Marple replied mildly. You were writing something, or reading something. Something important of that you didn't want anyone to see. The man stiffened. I am simply a passenger. My dear, Miss Marple interrupted kindly, your nerves betray you. You were expecting someone else. Someone who might have known what you carry in that leather case. His hand drifted instinctively toward it, not to protect it, but as if fearing it might already be gone. Miss Marple's voice lowered. Tell me, sir, were you expecting the man who is now frozen between the carriages? A crack, subtle but fatal, appeared in his composure. He sat down slowly, eyes fixed on her with a mixture of fear and calculation. I don't know who he is, he muttered. But someone has been following me since the train left Frostbell Station. And if he is dead, then I am not as safe here as I hoped. Miss Marple took her seat opposite him, folding her hands delicately. Oh dear, she murmured. Then I believe you, and I shall need to talk. Very thoroughly. Outside, the snowstorm intensified, battering the Frostbell Excursion Train as it carved through the white wilderness. Inside compartment B12, the mystery deepened. Chapter 4. The compartment with no footprints, the Frostbell Excursion Train hummed steadily along the whitewashed countryside, cutting through miles of frost-laden fields that shimmered like crushed diamonds under the morning sun. Inside, however, the atmosphere felt increasingly tight, as if the warm velvet compartments were shrinking with every passing minute. Miss Marple, seated beside the corridor window, watched the landscape flash past, rows of frozen hedgerows, distant farmhouses, and pale winter skies. The rhythmic sway of the train would have been soothing under any other circumstance, but now it served as a gentle reminder. A man had died on this train, and the killer was still aboard. Across the compartment, Colonel Barrington paced with stiff military precision, glaring at the polished floor as though it personally offended him. Near the doorway, Mrs. Whitcomb, trembling and pale, clutched her handkerchief in both hands while stealing nervous glances toward the corridor. Mr. Grange, the investment broker, sat rigidly in his seat, his face blotchy. a bead of sweat forming near his receding hairline. Constable Reeves, summoned forward by the conductor, stood at the threshold of the compartment, jaw tight and eyes carrying the familiar mixture of concern and apprehension that comes when the world suddenly asks more of you than training can provide. Miss Marple cleared her throat softly. "If I may," she said in her gentle tone, "I wonder if we might begin by reconsidering the physical impossibilities of this crime." Reeves looked relieved, almost grateful, to have her guidance once more. The other passengers seemed less enthusiastic, their eyes flicking uneasily between her and the closed compartment door behind them. Colonel Barrington was the first to speak. "The facts are simple enough. The man was stabbed. The window to his compartment was shut, and the door was locked from the inside. It must have been suicide." Miss Marple lifted a kindly brow. "With a knife wound delivered from behind, Colonel?" Barrington stiffened. "Well, some sort of desperate contortion." "Desperation," Miss Marple said gently, "rarely encouraged acrobatics." She stood, steadying herself with her cane, and glanced toward the corridor. "Constable, I would very much like to examine the deceased's compartment once more, particularly the floor." Reeves nodded. "Of course. Follow me." The passengers followed at a distance, drawn by equal parts dread and curiosity. The corridor felt colder now, the hum of the wheels softer. Shadows clung more noticeably to the ceiling corners as Reeves unlocked the compartment door and stepped aside. It was a perfectly ordinary train cabin, or so it appeared. Plush burgundy seats, polished brass fittings, neatly drawn curtains. But it was the silence inside that made it unsettling. Not the peaceful kind, but the hollow sort left behind when a life has already departed. And then there was the body, still respectfully covered with a wool blanket until arrival at the next major stop. Miss Marple paused before it, eyes full of quiet sorrow. Death always softened her expression, not because she feared it, but because she respected it. "Constable," she murmured, "may I?" Reeves nodded. She turned her attention to the floor. Thick carpet, immaculate, undisturbed. Not a single footprint, not from the victim, not from the killer, not from anyone else. Colonel Barrington frowned. "It's a train, Miss Marple. People come and go. The vibration and carpet pile could have—" "No," Miss Marple said gently. "Not on this train. Not in winter, when passengers bring snow upon their shoes from the platforms. The moisture leaves patterns impossible to disguise so quickly." Reeves crouched to look. "She's right. There's nothing. No compression. No watermarks. No loose fibers disturbed. It looks like no one entered at all." "And yet someone clearly did," Miss Marple said softly. "Or was already here." Mrs. Whitcomb gasped quietly behind her. "You mean—" "He may have known his killer." "It is rarely strangers who slip into one's private space unnoticed," Miss Marple replied. She leaned closer, inspecting the narrow gap beneath the folding table, the polished brass rail, the luggage compartment. Then she noticed something. A faint line, almost invisible, where the carpet pile changed direction. It ran perfectly straight from the door to the seat where the victim had been found. Miss Marple touched it with the tip of her gloved finger. A track, she murmured. Not from footsteps, but from something dragged or pushed. Reeves blinked. Dragged? Colonel Barrington frowned. A suitcase, perhaps? Too narrow, Miss Marple whispered. Too light. But something, or someone, disturbed the fibers without stepping on them. She moved her hand slowly along the line, following it until it reached the seat. Then she looked upward at the luggage rack. The others followed her gaze. Inside the polished brass rack, behind a row of neatly arranged suitcases, lay a faint smear on the metal, hardly visible unless one looked for it. Handprint. Upside down. Mrs. Whitcomb gasped. Mr. Grange stepped backward as if struck. Reeves whispered. Someone was hiding above him. Miss Marple nodded. Yes, quietly, patiently, and dropped down behind him at just the moment when the train noise masked the movement. Colonel Barrington's voice cracked for the first time. Good Lord. Miss Marple turned to the group, her expression quiet and grave. This was not a crime of passion, she said, nor an act of desperation. This was deliberate, calculated, and performed by someone agile enough to lower themselves, unnoticed from above, someone familiar with the train, comfortable with tight spaces, and confident they would not be seen. Her gaze lowered to the single, straight line in the carpet once more, and someone who left behind only the faintest trace, she added. Mrs. Whitcomb clutched her chest. But who could do such a thing? Miss Marple looked slowly around the cramped compartment, her eyes drifting over each face, fearful, defensive, guilty, or unreadable. That, she said gently, is what we shall soon learn. Chapter 5. Timetables of Hervé. The Frostbell Excursion Train cut a cold silver line through the winter landscape, its carriages rattling softly as they pushed on through the snow. Outside, fields lay buried beneath white drifts, and distant trees looked like ink sketches against a pale sky. Inside, however, the air felt close and strained, as if the narrow corridors themselves were listening. Miss Marple sat in the lounge car, hands folded neatly around a cooling cup of tea. The little table in front of her was scattered with the items she had asked to see: a folded timetable, a menu card from last night's dinner, a list of passengers supplied reluctantly by the guard, and a small square of paper with her own cramped handwriting. Opposite her sat Constable Reeves, his shoulders too broad for the delicate chair, uniform slightly creased from a night of too little sleep and too much walking up and down the train. He had the expression of a man trying to hold several ideas in his head at once and not quite managing to make them fit between them. The carriage hummed with a low murmur, passengers whispering, cups clinking, the occasional clatter of a spoon dropped by a trembling hand. News of Mr. Redmayne's death had seeped through the train like spilled ink. No one was shouting. No one was hysterical. But no one was at ease. "Let us begin again, shall we?" Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm. "Not with theories, but with times. People so often lie about their intentions, Constable, but they are far less careful with clocks." She smoothed the timetable with a gloved hand. It was printed in dark ink, the Frostbell Excursion's elegant route laid out like a promise of adventure, departure, intermediate stops, arrival at Frostbell halt. Now, the neat little columns had acquired a more sinister significance. Reeves sighed. "All right," he said. "We know Redmayne was alive at 10:30. The steward says he took up his night cocoa to him around then. The neighboring passengers heard him moving after that." Miss Marple murmured. "Mr. Layton in the next compartment heard footsteps around 11:15, did he not? A heavier tread than the steward's, if I recall." Reeves nodded. Said it sounded more like a man in boots than soft-soled shoes. Could have been anyone walking the corridor, though. "Possibly," Miss Marple agreed. "But Mr. Layton is a man who notices detail. He collects model trains. People who like miniature things tend to be quite precise." She tapped the small scrap of paper with her handwriting, and Mrs. Redmayne, she went on, says she last saw her husband at 10:15. When she left his compartment after what she described as a disagreement about plans. Reeves snorted. "She called a blazing row a disagreement. That's generous." "Well, we must allow for pride," Miss Marple said mildly. "It rarely tells the whole story, but it colors the way people choose their words." She picked up the passenger list. "Let us see," she murmured. Between 10 and 11, who had a reason or an excuse to be near Mr. Redmayne's compartment? Reeves rubbed his forehead. "Mrs. Redmayne, obviously." "She admits it. Mr. Blythe, the railway director, he claims he was in the dining car finishing his brandy, but the waiter says he left around 10:40. That puts him on the move at roughly the right time." "And Colonel Archer?" Miss Marple asked. "He was most insistent about punctuality at dinner last night. Men obsessed with punctuality, I've noticed, tend to notice who is late and why. He says he was in the smoking compartment," Reeves replied, "talking about the war and card games with 2 other gentlemen. They back his story. But the smoking compartment is at the far end of the coach, still reachable in a couple of minutes." "So not impossible," Miss Marple said. "Merely inconvenient." She moved her gaze to the next name. "And Miss Temple?" "Our anxious schoolteacher with the leather satchel?" "Claims she went early to bed," Reeves said. "Says she feels unwell on trains. But the steward swears he saw her in the corridor at around 10:50 near the lavatory, looking rather agitated." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "There are few things more suspicious than people who insist they were fast asleep during an incident. Sleep, in my experience, is rarely so convenient." She was quiet for a moment, listening though not to the passengers. She listened to the subtle rhythm of the train itself, the steady pulse of iron and steam, a moving train. "Constable," she said at last, "gives people a false sense of security. They think that because everything is in motion, nothing can be pinned down. But in truth, it is the opposite. On a train, people can only be in one of a very few places: compartment, corridor, dining car, or lavatory. The possibilities are limited." Reeves shifted. "You make it sound almost simple." "Oh, it rarely is," she said kindly. "But we can make it less muddled." She picked up the menu card from the night before and laid it beside the timetable. At dinner, Mr. Redmayne was seated with Mrs. Redmayne, Miss Temple, and Colonel Archer, she recalled. He was quite vocal, I think, about his business successes, and about how this excursion was to celebrate closing a deal. People who boast of such things in public often find that their audience listens more carefully than they intend. Reeves frowned. You think somebody on the train had a financial connection to him? It is not uncommon, Miss Marple said. I once knew a man who boasted in a public house about how much cash he had on him. He was astonished when, half an hour later, someone relieved him of it. But truly, I could not see why. A faint smile touched Reeves' mouth despite himself. Now, Miss Marple went on, we have 3 interesting pieces. The Times, the quarrel with his wife, and the fact that Mr. Redmayne's briefcase is missing. Reeves stiffened. You're sure it's missing? I thought perhaps it was just moved. The steward is quite certain he placed it on the luggage rack when he helped make up the berth, Miss Marple said. Yet when the body was found, there was no briefcase. Only the coat, the closed window, and the cocoa cup untouched. Reeves' brows drew together. If someone came only to kill him, why take the briefcase? That, Miss Marple said quietly, is why I think someone did not come only to kill him. They came first to talk to him, to persuade, to threaten, perhaps to make one last bargain. They believed whatever was in that briefcase mattered enough to risk being seen. She folded the menu card, fingers very precise. Consider Miss Temple, she said. We know she lied about being in bed. The steward saw her. Mrs. Redmayne heard a woman's footsteps at some point later, quicker than the steward's, and Miss Temple has that rather anxious way of holding her satchel, as though she expects someone to pull it from her at any moment. You think she stole the briefcase? Reeves asked. I think Miss Temple might have been looking for something she believed Mr. Redmayne was carrying, Miss Marple replied. Not necessarily for herself. Perhaps for someone else. People who are easily frightened are sometimes very willing to act on another's instructions, especially if they think it will fix something that has been worrying them. The train gave a gentle shudder as it passed over a set of points. The carriage rattled. A spoon clinked in someone's cup. Miss Marple looked up, her expression suddenly distant. We must also not forget the snow, she said. When we stopped during the night, because of that drift on the line, anyone who stepped off the train would have left marks. Yet there were none when the guard checked. So the killer never left the train. Reeves blew out a breath. Stuck on a train with a murderer. Feels like a bad story in a magazine. Oh, those stories are almost always tidier than real life, Miss Marple said. The truth is generally more untidy. People take opportunities for multiple reasons. Personal bitterness mixed with financial gain, fear tied up with resentment. And then, when violence occurs, they are always so surprised that it does not obey the neatness of their plan. She placed her fingertips on the timetable. Look here, Constable, she said. The Frostbell excursion was due to arrive at Frostbell Halt this morning at 9:45. Because of the delay in the night, we will instead arrive closer to 11. That gives us a rather small window. Once we reach a station, things become far more complicated. People can disembark. Luggage can be moved. Evidence can be spirited away. Reeves frowned. so we need to get to the heart of it before the train stops." "Precisely," Miss Marple said softly. "While our little world is still, contained." She looked up, her eyes thoughtful. "I should like to speak next to Miss Temple alone," she said. "Not as a suspect, people close like clams when you call them that, but as a frightened woman who has done something she does not fully understand." "And Mrs. Redmayne?" Reeves asked. "She lied as well." "Downplaying that argument." "Yes," Miss Marple said quietly. "But she strikes me as a woman who lies to protect her pride. Miss Temple, on the other hand, appears to lie to protect someone else." "Who?" Reeves demanded. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the passenger list. "That," she said, "is what Chapter 5 of our little journey must reveal." She rose, smoothing her skirt, taking up her knitting bag as though she were simply going to indulge in a quiet stretch of the legs, "as I have often found. Constable," she added gently, "one does not catch killers by chasing them. One allows them to trip over the very things they were so certain they had tidied away." She moved toward the door, pausing just long enough, "and in this case," she murmured, "I suspect that tidied thing may be hidden not in a gentleman's compartment, but in a nervous schoolteacher's satchel." Then she stepped out into the corridor, the murmur of voices rising as she went to find Miss Temple. Chapter 6. The midnight confession in carriage F5 hissed gently against the windows of the Frostbell Excursion Train, the flakes swirling so thickly that the world outside had dissolved into a shifting white void. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels, usually comforting, felt sharp tonight, tense, as though the train itself sensed the unease spreading through its passengers. Constable Grayson had moved through carriage 3 searching for witnesses. The porter had locked the rear section. The inspector from London was on his way from the dining car. But none of them, Miss Marple thought, were looking in the right direction, because the right direction was not forward. It was backward, toward the one carriage no one had bothered to check since the murder. Carriage 5, the excursion's observation lounge, now empty. Supposedly, Miss Marple walked toward it at a steady, unhurried pace. She didn't look like someone hunting danger. She looked like a gentle old lady who needed the quiet. That was always her great advantage. Her cane tapped softly against the polished floorboards as she entered the narrow connector between carriages. The noise of voices behind her faded, replaced by the steady hum of the train, the ghostly howl of wind outside, and the chill that seeped through the metal frame. She touched the knob of carriage 5. It was warm. Someone was inside. Inside carriage 5. The door opened with a soft metallic sigh. Carriage 5 was dim. Only 2 lamps glowed, one at the far end and another above a velvet sofa. Snow-coated windows diffused the light into a pale shimmer, and there, hunched over on the sofa, hands shaking, was a man Miss Marple recognized immediately. Mr. Lionel Carstairs. Middle-aged, quiet, nervous to a fault. A man who had seemed terrified when the murdered passenger, Mr. Dorian Leffing, was found stabbed beside the luggage racks. Lionel jerked upright when he saw her. "Miss Marple? You shouldn't be here." "Oh, my dear," she smiled gently, stepping closer. "I go where frightened people go. It is a habit of mine." as is knitting, though I fear this evening has not allowed much time for that." He swallowed, glancing toward the closed curtains as though expecting someone or something to burst through. "They'll accuse me," he whispered. "I know they will, not unless you give them reason." Lionel let out a laugh, not one of amusement, but of desperation. "Oh, but I already have, Miss Marple. Far too much reason." She took the seat opposite him, Cane resting lightly beside her. "Then why don't you tell me?" she said softly. "What has frightened you into hiding here in the coldest carriage on the train?" People do not flee unless they feel the truth snapping at their heels. Snapping at their heels. Lionel pressed his hands to his eyes. "I didn't kill him." "I believe you," Miss Marple said at once. He looked up sharply. "You do?" "Yes," she said. "Because murderers usually do not tremble themselves into knots after committing the act. Nor do they hide in dark carriages hoping no one will find them. But frightened men do. Frightened innocent men." Lionel's shoulders loosened just slightly. "I saw something," he whispered. "Something terrible. Something I should have told Constable Grayson. But I couldn't. I was afraid." "Afraid of whom?" Miss Marple asked. His eyes widened with real terror. "Afraid of the woman." Miss Marple folded her hands calmly. "Which woman?" Lionel's voice dropped to a whisper. "Mrs. Evangeline Pierce." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted. "The glamorous widow in the red coat?" Lionel nodded furiously. "She visited Dorian Leving's compartment before he died. She threatened him. Quietly, but I heard it." "What did she say?" "That she would not let him ruin her second chance, whatever that means." Miss Marple thought for a moment. "And you believe she killed him?" Lionel hesitated. "No," he finally said. "I don't." Miss Marple leaned forward ever so slightly. "Then what is it you fear, Mr. Carstairs?" He inhaled shakily, glancing around the carriage. "That someone else saw me listening. Someone who shouted at Dorian earlier in the evening." "And who had every reason to kill him. And who was that?" Lionel swallowed. "The inspector. Inspector Rowan Hawley." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but sharpened too. "And why would Inspector Hawley kill Mr. Leffing?" Lionel's voice trembled. "Because Mr. Leffing wasn't his victim. He was his blackmailer." Miss Marple exhaled slowly. This was the thread she had been waiting for. "Mr. Carstairs," she said gently, "I am going to ask you a question I need you to answer very carefully." He nodded. "When you left carriage 3 after the shouting match earlier, did you return straight to your compartment?" "No." A pause. I walked past carriage 2, and I saw Inspector Hawley sneaking toward the luggage area. He looked different, pale, wild, like he had just seen a ghost." "And did he see you?" Lionel's voice cracked. Double quotes, "Yes. And he said, best keep your ears to yourself, Carstairs. People get hurt when they eavesdrop." The carriage seemed to freeze around them. Wind slammed against the window, rattling the glass. Miss Marple sat perfectly still. "Mr. Carstairs," she asked gently, "why did you hide here instead of reporting this?" "Because if Inspector Hawley knew I had overheard anything, he would come after me next." "I knew it. I felt it." Miss Marple nodded slowly. Fear is a powerful silencer, she murmured. It has prevented many truths from speaking when they ought to. Lionel looked at her helplessly. What do I do? You tell the truth, Miss Marple said softly. And you do so now, before whoever killed Mr. Leffing tries to kill again. Lionel shivered. You think there will be another murder? Miss Marple rose slowly, lifting her cane. My dear Mr. Carstairs, when a blackmailer dies, the person who killed them often fears one thing above all others. What? That someone else knows their secret. The lamps flickered. Footsteps echoed faintly from the next carriage. Slow, measured. Approaching. Lionel turned pale. It's him, he whispered. Inspector Halley, he's coming. Miss Marple's eyes glinted with sharp, cold intelligence. Then let us step carefully, she said, and see which secret he fears most. Chapter 7. The Empty Compartment. Frostbell Excursion Train rattled deeper into the winter valley, the mountains rising like white-crowned guardians on either side. Snow fell in soft spirals, tapping lightly against the frosted windows. But inside Carriage C, the air was tight, still. Holding its breath, Miss Marple walked slowly down the narrow corridor. Her steps careful, steady, as though each footfall weighed not just her body, but her thoughts. There had been too many inconsistencies. Too many stories told too neatly. Too many lies wrapped in polite smiles. And now, Miss Marple was going to confirm one of them. She paused at the final compartment on the left. Compartment C-12. Locked. Just as the conductor had insisted, it had been since boarding. Empty, he had said. Reserved but unused, he had explained. No one ever stepped inside, he maintained. Miss Marple rested her fingers on the cool brass handle. People often believed a lie could hold its shape forever. But lies decayed. They sagged. They cracked at the smallest pressure. And Miss Marple was very good at pressing. She turned to the young conductor, Mr. Elwood, who stood a few steps behind her, stiff as a fence post. My dear, she said softly, would you unlock it, please? Elwood hesitated, a single sharp flicker in his eyes. Then he forced a smile. Of course, Miss Marple. But I assure you, no one has. Please, she repeated gently. Not a request. A sentence shaped like a request. He swallowed, produced a ring of keys, and after a fumbling moment, found the correct one. The lock clicked. A soft mechanical sigh. Miss Marple leaned slightly forward, her breath slow, steady, her expression serenely composed, but her eyes watching everything. Elwood slid the door open. A gust of air emerged, colder than the corridor, tinged with something faint but unmistakable. Cigar smoke, old, stale, but present. Miss Marple stepped inside. The compartment was dim, blinds half drawn, winter light cutting across the upholstery in a pale stripe. The seats were empty, but not unused. Very not unused. Her eyes swept swiftly, cataloging detail after detail. A cushion dent too deep to be from storage. A smear on the window glass at shoulder height. A faint scuff on the floor, the kind made by a man's heavier shoe pivoting sharply. And on the small fold-out table, a thin circle of melted frost. As if something cold, very cold, had been set there not long ago. Miss Marple touched it with her gloved fingertip. Beads of moisture glistened. Definitely not empty. She turned slowly. "Mr. Elwood," she said, her voice gentle, almost sympathetic. "How long have you been working on the Frostbell route?" "2 years," he said quickly. "A dependable young man," she murmured. "I imagine you don't like trouble. Which is why, when someone more senior told you to keep this compartment locked and unseen, you obeyed." Elwood blanched. I don't, Miss Marple. I didn't." She held up a small hand. "No need for distress, dear. I don't yet know whether the trouble is yours or someone else's." She moved to the seat nearest the window and observed a faint indentation on the armrest. A small dark grain lodged in the fabric seam. She plucked it gently. Soot. Very fine. Rail soot. Fresh. Someone had entered through the exterior walkway, maybe between cars. Maybe when the train slowed around a curve. A secret meeting place. A hiding place. A waiting place. And possibly a killing place. Miss Marple turned back to Elwood. "I believe," she said softly, "this compartment was used shortly before the body was discovered." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. And then, very quietly, "I was told not to speak of it." "By whom?" Elwood's throat bobbed. His nerves were a tightly wound wire. I don't want to get anyone in trouble." "Oh, my dear boy," Miss Marple said kindly, "a man has been murdered on this train. Whoever you are protecting is already in trouble." She let silence rest between them for a moment, not heavy, not threatening, just patient. The truth loved patience. It always came home to it. Finally, Elwood whispered. It was Mr. Hargrove, the senior steward. Miss Marple nodded slowly, as if she already expected as much, because she had. "And what did he tell you to do?" "That if anyone asked about compartment C12, I was to say it was reserved for a passenger who never boarded." He hesitated. There was a man. This morning, before sunrise. I didn't see his face. He entered from the rear platform and slipped inside. Mr. Hargrove met him." "Did they argue?" "No, they whispered, low, urgent, what happened next." They left separately before breakfast service. Mr. Hargrove pretended nothing happened. The other man, I don't know where he went. Miss Marple looked down at the melted ring of frost again. "And you didn't think to report this when the body was found?" "I was scared," Elwood admitted, voice breaking slightly. "I still am." Miss Marple gave him a gentle nod. "That is perfectly understandable. But today, I'm afraid, you must be brave." She stood. "Please fetch Mr. Hargrove," she said. "And Mr. Linton, the ticket inspector, and the gentleman in carriage B with the fox fur collar. Bring them to me at once." Elwood blinked. "All of them?" "Yes," Miss Marple said calmly. "Because I now know 3 things with absolute certainty." She lifted one gloved finger. "First, the victim was in this compartment shortly before he died. A second finger. Second, someone else met him here. A third, and third, one of the people I just asked you to fetch is lying about that meeting." Her gaze locked on Elwood's, steady and unwavering. "And my dear," she added softly, The killer is counting on that lie to hold. She stepped back into the corridor, leaving the compartment behind, but bringing its secrets with her. The Frostbell train rattled on. Snow fell harder. The mountains loomed closer, and somewhere among the passengers Miss Marple had summoned. A mutterer's pulse quickened. Chapter 8. The Passenger Who Saw Two Emus. The Frostbell Excursion Train trembled gently as it wound through narrow mountain passes, snow-clad peaks rising like cold white sentries on either side. Inside the dining carriage, heat shimmered faintly against windows frosted in delicate patterns. The passengers, still shaken by the morning's discovery, spoke in careful whispers, fragments of fear rising like embers in a draught. Miss Marple sat alone at a corner table, knitting needles gently clinking, her eyes not on the yarn but on the people gathered in the far carriage. To the untrained eye she looked peaceful, absorbed in her wool. To those who knew better, especially those who feared their own secrets, her very stillness was a warning. Someone on this train had killed Mr. Roland Pierce. Someone had placed his body brutally behind the ornamental trolley at the end of carriage C, and someone had tried too hard to pretend they were asleep at the time. The train's conductor approached quietly, hat in hand. "Miss Marple, a passenger is asking to speak with you privately. He says it is urgent." She nodded without looking up. "The gentleman with the gray traveling cloak, I presume?" The conductor blinked. "Yes, how did you?" "People with burdens tend not to sit still. They pace, they glance at doors, and they look at me as if they expect to be discovered." She folded her knitting neatly. "Please bring him." A moment later, a tall, thin man with anxious eyes slipped into the seat opposite her. He removed his cloak, revealing pale, shaking hands. "My name is Alfred Cheston," he said in a trembling voice. I believe what I know might be important, but I beg you don't involve my wife. She's already in a delicate state." Miss Marple smiled kindly. "My dear Mr. Cheston, you are not the first man who feared the truth more for a loved one than for himself. Now, what troubles you?" He swallowed hard. "Last night, quite late, I couldn't sleep. The rocking of the train sometimes calms me, sometimes disturbs me. So I stepped into the corridor for air, you understand. Of course, I walked toward carriage K, the one where the body was found." Miss Marple's eyes lifted. "How late was this?" "Somewhere near 11:30. My watch had stopped, or I'd be more precise." She tucked that detail away. People often blamed objects for their own uncertainties. Mr. Cheston leaned forward, voice nearly a whisper. "I heard voices in the dark." "Voices?" "Yes, a man and a woman." The woman was angry. "Fiercely so." She said, "If you breathe a word of this, you'll lose far more than your position." And he sounded frightened. Miss Marple watched him carefully. "Did you see their faces?" "No, only silhouettes. The lights were dimmed, but I recognized the man's posture. He kept straightening his tie. Roland Pierce had that habit, always adjusting himself as if he feared being judged." "And the woman?" "That is where I hesitate." He lowered his voice further. "I am not entirely certain. but I believe it was Mrs. Lillian Hartley. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. Mrs. Hartley glamorous, crisp in manner, far too composed for the tension she pretended not to feel, had claimed she went to bed early and slept soundly through the night. Why did you not mention this to the conductor or the constable? Miss Marple asked gently. He ran a trembling hand over his face. Because Mrs. Hartley is a friend of my wife, and my wife worships her. And if I drag her name into this, it will upset everything, our journey, our friendships, her peace of mind. Miss Marple gave a soft, sympathetic sigh. Mr. Cheston, truth has a way of disturbing peace long before anyone speaks it aloud. The wiser course is always to face it. Just then, heavy footsteps thundered down the corridor. The train jolted slightly, sending a ripple of unease through the carriage. The conductor returned, this time pale. Miss Marple, Mrs. Hartley has requested to speak with you immediately. Mr. Cheston stiffened. Miss Marple rose. Thank you. Show her to the empty drawing compartment. The compartment at the rear was quiet, lined with velvet seats and brass fixtures. Outside its window, snowflakes spiraled past like falling stars. Lillian Hartley entered with brisk elegance. She wore gloves despite the warm carriage, and her posture was stiff enough to crack. Miss Marple, she said coldly, I understand you have been speaking with Mr. Cheston. Yes, Miss Marple replied mildly. He has been terribly worried. I'm sure he has, she snapped. But before he fills your head with nonsense, I must clarify something. I did speak with Mr. Pierce last night, briefly and privately. Miss Marple nodded as though this were no surprise. Because it wasn't. And why? She asked gently. Did you decide to admit it only now? Mrs. Hartley inhaled sharply. Her gloves tightened. Because someone saw us. Someone always does. And if the truth is going to come out, I wish to give my version first. How sensible, Miss Marple murmured. Mrs. Hartley sat down, chin lifted but eyes troubled. Roland Pierce threatened me, she said. He said he knew something about my husband's business dealings that could ruin us. He wanted money to keep quiet. Blackmail. Miss Marple observed her tremor. And did you pay him? Of course not. I told him to leave us alone, to keep his vile insinuations to himself, and after that, I returned to my compartment. Her voice thinned. I never saw him again. Miss Marple folded her hands. Mrs. Hartley, people rarely kill for small sums. They kill for things they cannot afford to lose. Lillian's eyes flashed with anger and fear. Before Miss Marple could press further, a loud shout echoed down the corridor. Miss Marple, you're needed quickly. She stepped into the hallway where a cluster of passengers had gathered. The train lurched into a tunnel, its lights flickering, and then she saw it. A fresh smear of blood on the handle of the luggage compartment, bright new, and unmistakably human. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The killer was not only aboard, the killer was panicking, and panic made. Murderers reckless. You knew Mr. Braxby's habits better than you let on. You knew how he liked his drinks. You knew he hated anything too sweet. So when he insisted on a particular cordial tonight, it was not out of character. She turned her head slightly. But what was out of character, she went on, was for the bottle in the staff pantry to be almost empty when Mr. Harrow went back just minutes later, and for another identical bottle to be missing entirely. Mr. Pike noticed that on his rounds. He thought nothing of it at the time. I did not. Inspector Lake stared at her. You mean, Miss Marple's voice dropped. The poison, I am quite sure, was not in the glass alone, she said. It was in the cordial bottle swapped during a moment of distraction. A moment when Mr. Harrow stepped away from the pantry to deal with a demanding passenger in the corridor. A moment when someone who knew exactly which bottle Braxby favored could slip in and change it. Her eyes returned to Mrs. Redfern, whose face was now ashen. You visited the pantry once, did you not? Miss Marple asked. You told Mr. Harrow you wanted more sugar for your tea. And yet, curiously, you never took the tea back with you. You left flustered, empty-handed. You said you changed your mind, but what you had changed, I fear, was not your mind at all. The train seemed to sway harder for a heartbeat. Mrs. Redfern's lips parted. But no sound emerged. It was never about being sweet, was it? Miss Marple finished gently. Not in the cup. Only in the bottle. The carriage was utterly still now, save for the rhythmic clatter of wheels on track beneath them, carrying them inexorably forward toward the next and final stop. Mrs. Redfern looked from Miss Marple to Inspector Lake, to the others, then back again. Her composure, so carefully maintained, had cracked at last. You have no proof, she managed. Miss Marple's expression remained soft, almost sorrowful. Perhaps not enough for a hanging, she said quietly. That will be for Inspector Lake to determine. But for me, it is enough to know the pattern. A woman cornered, threatened with ruin, trapped on a festive train with the man who holds her life in his hands. A bottle altered, a cordial sweetened, just enough to kill. Lake straightened. Mrs. Redfern, he said, voice firm, I think you and I had better talk in the guard's compartment. In detail. As he moved forward, the train plunged through a tunnel, plunging the windows into momentary blackness. For a second, faces became mere reflections, guilt, fear, exhaustion floating in the glass. When the light returned, nothing had changed outwardly, but everything had. Miss Marple sank gently into the nearest seat, fingers folding over each other, the faintest tremor running through them. The pieces were almost all in place now. All that remained was what came after. Chapter 10. The Last Mile to Just City. The Frostbell Excursion Train cut through the winter landscape like a steel blade shining beneath a pale morning sky. Snow glittered along the tracks, frozen in delicate swirls shaped by the wind. The countryside lay silent, as though the world itself were holding its breath, waiting for the final truth to emerge. In the first-class carriage, the passengers sat subdued, wrapped in coats in worry. The atmosphere had shifted entirely since the investigation began. Conversations had dulled. Teacups sat untouched. Someone had closed the velvet curtains halfway, allowing only slanted bands of cold sunlight to paint the room. At the center of it all sat Miss Marple. Her knitting lay still beside her, unusual enough to draw subtle glances from those who had noticed her habits. Her pale blue eyes were not on her needles, but fixed on the two men seated across from her, Inspector Lyle of the county police, stiff in posture, and Mr. Corbett, whose hands trembled ever so slightly each time he reached for his handkerchief. Corbett had aged years in the last hour. His eyes, usually pinched from suspicion or self-importance, now held something else entirely. Resignation. Miss Marple looked at him with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the tension in the room. "Mr. Corbett," she began quietly, "you know why we are here." He swallowed hard. His gaze flickered to Inspector Lyle, then back to the elderly woman whose soft voice had somehow cornered him more effectively than any officer could. She continued, "When the train stopped last night, when the lights flickered, when poor Mr. Redgrave was found in the corridor with frost on his coat collar and the marks upon his wrist, that was not an accident of circumstance. It was murder. And it was planned." There was a hush. Even the train seemed to soften its rhythmic clatter. As though the engine itself leaned in, Corbett's lips parted. But no words emerged. Inspector Lyle cleared his throat. "Miss Marple, if you'd like me to—" She lifted a hand politely. "In a moment, Inspector." Her gaze returned to Corbett. And despite her calm tone, something in her expression had sharpened, the steel beneath the wool. "You see," she said, "I had been thinking about the frost." That drew a few confused looks. "Yes," she repeated, "the frost. On Mr. Redgrave's collar. It was not natural frost from the night air. Not for that part of the train, certainly. But it was consistent with something else entirely, the freezer compartment in the dining carriage." Corbett flinched visibly. Miss Marple inclined her head. "You had access, of course." "Not as staff, but as a frequent benefactor of the excursion board. They grant favors to men like you, men who help fund the line's special winter tours." Inspector Lyle added, "We checked. Your name is on the access list." Corbett's jaw tightened. Miss Marple continued gently, "You used the brief blackout, caused not by a malfunction, but by your tampering with the fuse panel, to drag Mr. Redgrave into the freezer and restrain him, just long enough to ensure what looked like exposure. Cold burns leave patterns, Mr. Corbett, not unlike rope. The marks on his wrist were the final confirmation." Tears welled suddenly in Corbett's eyes. "You don't understand," he rasped. "He was going to ruin me." Miss Marple sighed softly. "He was going to expose your embezzlement from the charity trust. Yes, I suspected as much once I learned he had been reviewing the accounts." Corbett buried his face in his hands. "He wasn't supposed to die. I only meant to frighten him. Make him back off." Miss Marple's eyes softened in sorrow. Intentions often change shape when fear and desperation become poor traveling companions. Inspector Lyle rose from his seat. "Mr. Corbett, I must ask you to stand." "You are under arrest." But Miss Marple raised her hand again. "One moment more." "Inspector." She leaned forward just slightly, her voice lowering. "What troubles me most, Mr. Corbett, is not that you killed a man out of desperation, but that you believed, quite sincerely, that a crowded train would shield you." Corbett lifted his head slowly. "How?" Miss Marple smiled sadly. because evil often believes itself invisible when surrounded by noise, movement, and distraction. But patterns, Mr. Corbett, patterns reveal everything. She raised a delicate finger. Your seat sat empty for 23 minutes. Your gloves were damp with melted frost. The dining carriage staff remember you asking for directions to the freezer. And the most telling detail of all, the tiny fleck of freezer ice still clinging to your cuff this morning. Corbett's face crumpled. A sound escaped his throat, half sob, half dash confession. Inspector Lyle stepped behind him. "Fastening the cuffs, for what it's worth," he said gruffly. "You might have gotten away with it if not for Miss Marple." Miss Marple gave a gentle, weary smile. "Oh, I do hope not, Inspector. I should hate to think I've been rendered unnecessary." The train began to slow as they approached the next station, a quaint winter platform decorated with lanterns and wreaths. Somewhere beyond the glass, the station master's voice echoed through cold air. Passengers leaned forward, whispering, watching as Corbett was guided down the corridor. The case had melted away at last, leaving behind only frost, memory, and the quiet knowledge that justice, slow though it sometimes was, eventually reached its destination. Miss Marple lifted her knitting once more. Her needles clicked softly. "People do reveal themselves in time," she murmured, "even on a train rushing through winter." And with that, she resumed her knitting, serene and composed, while snowflakes drifted gently past the window, fragile, fleeting, and honest in their descent.